Hello, everybody. Welcome to Raising Multilinguals Live. My name is Tetsu Young, wishing everybody a good start to the second month. Already the second month of the year. That's incredible. A new month. We're starting a little differently today. We're actually streaming on Facebook and YouTube at the same time. So if everything's going well, if you are seeing the live stream, please write in a little comment, say hello, and as I send this off to my colleagues.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ute Limacher-Riebold from Ute's International Lounge. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, my name is Rita Rosenbach from multilingualparenting.com. And I have the honor and I'm really excited to be able to introduce our guest, Professor Annick De Houwer, who's a professor of language acquisition and multilingualism at the University of Erfurt in Germany, as well as director of the HaBilNet network. I am so excited to have you here, Annick. I've read your books, I followed you. I appreciate all that you do for parents who are raising the children with many languages. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, all three of you, for inviting me. This is really great. I love the initiative that you have in doing all these interviews. Okay, so you asked me a little bit about myself. I started off, well, I am a linguist. Can you hear me? I hear myself a little bit echo. It's fine? Okay, good. So I started off as a linguist, meaning, you know, I really studied, or I learned to study language as an object. And very soon I got very interested in how young children learn two languages. And I then did a PhD about it, and I wrote my dissertation about it. And the result of that dissertation was this book behind me, The Acquisition of Two Languages from Birth, a case study, which was much shorter than my PhD, but anyway. So that was a very detailed linguistic study of how does this work in the child's, not in the child's mind, because I cannot look into a child's mind, but how, what comes out of it. At that time when I was working on my PhD, there was this idea that in fact kids are really mixed up, bilingual kids, right. And just put everything on one pile basically, and that just gradually with time they managed to learn two languages and speak two languages. Mm-hmm. And I proved that this is not the case. So with what I call the separate development hypothesis, at least in terms of how kids make their build their sentences. So I did establish that, and I was also a psycholinguist in that sense. So psycholinguists and developmental psycholinguists, they really deal with how children learn languages. General psycholinguists, that goes much further than that. But so I specialize as a linguist and a psycholinguist, but at the same time, I also read a lot in the area of sociolinguistics. And of course, I also, in my book and my dissertation, I also paid attention to how this child that I followed used both languages, so language choice, which is a more sociolinguistic aspect. And I've tried in my career, I've tried to really push those two things at the same time because they are intrinsically connected to each other. And also later on in my career, I ended up at a communications department in a sociology faculty, basically. So they, in fact, one professor there said, "Oh, well, we're very happy to have you here as long as you don't deal with verbs and nouns." So then I said, okay. And but this offered me a great opportunity to do research on a much larger scale. Namely, I did then a huge survey, which has been cited all over all the time, about language use in families in Flanders. And in fact, we have information on language use about 18,000 families up until now. That's really the largest study of its kind about that. And it really did show me a lot about early child language development. So I have worked on a lot of different elements of how children learn languages. And I put together this knowledge. I was given the opportunity to do that by Multilingual Matters, a publishing house in the United Kingdom. And I was invited to write the first textbook on how children learn two languages from infancy, from birth. And that became then this big book, the Bilingual First Language Acquisition book. Thank you, Rita. Yes. So that was meant as a textbook for advanced students and for researchers. But at the same time, they asked me, "Oh, can't you write a book that is more accessible to maybe even parents who are interested or undergraduate students?" And then I wrote that in 1 month, actually. And that's an introduction to bilingual development. Yeah, right. And that they both appeared in the same year, in 2009. And that was the year that I moved to the University of Erfurt in Germany, where first I was a professor of language learning. And then later on, I changed that to language acquisition and multilingualism. And during that time, so a few years ago, my good friend and colleague Lourdes Ortega from the Georgetown University in the United States, she got in touch with me and said, "Well, Annick, don't you want to do a handbook with me on bilingualism?" And I said, "Okay." And so we did. And so that became then the Cambridge. Thank you. And I can just also tell you that anytime now, my latest book is going to go into production. And it's called Bilingual Development in Childhood. And it covers children's first 10 years of life. It's also with Cambridge University Press. And that is in a series on developmental psychology. And I want to really also recognize my longtime colleague and Mark Bornstein, who I have collaborated with for a long time and who invited me to contribute that book. So to also say that I've been working in a very interdisciplinary manner. That's the only way to go, really. Yeah. Oh, I haven't said anything about the Harmonious Bilingualism Network yet, which I initiated and which I'm the director of. And that is supposed to be a platform, not only for researchers, but also for parents. And I can say a little more about it later if you like, but maybe let's start with the first real.
Absolutely. We look forward to hearing about that too. So today our topic is how to effectively speak with your bilingual child. And I think that's such an important topic because generally you think, well, as long as you speak, it's fine. And as long as you speak enough, it is okay. But there is more to it than that. And these are, I just love the idea that there are techniques that parents can be aware of. to use when they're speaking. So this is something that you mention in your new book, in the Bilingual Development in Childhood, and they're called conversational strategies.
Yeah.
So can you please explain a little bit about this? So do parents have to learn a new way of talking, and how will this improve children picking up the languages?
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, conversational strategies. Those are actually strategies that Liz Lanza, your previous speaker, well, she basically invented this term. Is it a new way of speaking? I suppose yes, for many parents in bilingual families. So many parents have no experience themselves with growing up in a bilingual family. So for many, yes, this may be quite new. So what it means is there are strategies that are going to help the child speak back in the language you speak to them, which is really what you would like. So when you are raising a bilingual child, you probably want your child to speak two languages, not just one language, and to speak two languages. And from very early on, your child will be hearing two different languages, words in two different languages. And at a certain point, when they're very young, maybe 1.5, between 1.5 and 2, they'll start to really speak and say words. And you'll be so happy that they're speaking and saying words, but you may not understand them very well yet. And when you do understand them, they may be saying a word in a language you're not speaking to them at that time. And then at that moment, you can stop and say, oh, what are you saying? What was that? And that's a conversational strategy that also monolingual families can use, namely when they don't understand what a child is saying. But doing that in a bilingual situation, it can get the child to change what they're saying. Now, when they're very, very young, they may not be able to do that yet. But as research from Liz Lanza definitely has shown, once they're beyond the second birthday, absolutely, they are able to do that, and they do it. And we know from research, and I've just recently made a review of this entire literature on the use of these conversational strategies. And it's not just about asking, oh, what was it that you were saying? I'll talk about that a little later in a moment. But, you know, what we know from this research is that parents who do this have children who speak two languages. So there is not a whole lot of literature on it. We need a lot more. But we also know from that literature, the little that there is, that parents who don't do it, they often have children who do not speak two languages. And that there is particularly one study from 2012 from the United States, a group study with like 64 children, which is unusually large for this kind of work, which really does show that when parents use these strategies where they are focusing on children's language choice, that means their selection of a particular language, which is not necessarily conscious, but you know, maintenant, si je commence à parler en français, I've made another language choice, yes, which was quite conscious in this particular instance. I briefly switched to French. So my language choice is basically just what language am I using at a particular time. That's what it is. So you can, as a parent, you can influence your children's language choice. Not 100% probably, but you can. And it's important also, as Liz Lanza has said, to socialize children from the very beginning into using a particular language with you. And after a little bit, they will also socialize you into that. They may do that. I remember my own daughter, who I had only spoken Dutch with when she was little, well, always actually, only Dutch, I had been on the phone with somebody in English, and then she was 3 years of age. And then I put down the phone and I said something to her in English. I was kind of still in my English mode. Mm-hmm. And she started to cry.
Yep.
She was so upset that I spoke a language to her that normally I didn't, even though she understood English. She was fully bilingual. I mean, she was fully fluent in both languages. But it just didn't fit who I was. It didn't fit that relationship. So that whole point is to build up a relationship in a particular language, which is not to say you can only speak one language with your child. Maybe we'll come to that in a moment. But okay, back to these, what are some of the strategies you can use is when your child is very young. It's very important to start when your child is very, very young. So from the very beginning, and to kind of be aware of it. And that's, I think, the hardest part, is to be aware of what's going on. But it's really, if you find it important that your child speaks your language and is able to also communicate to your mother or your father and other relatives, well, you've got to try to really become aware of what it is that you're doing yourself, and also what the baby, yes, because they're very small, well, not baby, but toddler is doing. Yeah. And when the toddler is a little older, so they start to have really quite a lot of language awareness after the second birthday, really. And they are quite aware who speaks what language, and they'll be surprised if somebody makes different choices than they're used to hearing. And when they themselves say something in a language that actually you want them to say it in your language, so to speak, you can say, oh, well, you know, when I'm with you, you know, my head is filled with all these words that I use when I speak with you. And then I cannot think of the other words. And you know, just said a word that I have no idea. You know, they're not in my head right now. Something like that. So you've got to find ways. And I know that this works because I've advised people to do this, and then they come back to me 2 weeks later and say, yay, it works. For the first time, she spoke Danish to me. Yay, I'm so happy. And it does work, but you got to keep doing it. And but small children they're very happy to please you. I'm talking about small children, right? But if you lay this groundwork from the very beginning, then you create a situation where, in particular situations and settings, the child will use one particular language with you. And you can do another language in other settings. That's fine. So I'm not here necessarily advocating one person, one language, but within one conversation in one setting, yes, I am. If you are interested in your child actually learning to speak in both languages, because of course somebody else is going to do the same, but in another language, or you yourself are going to do this in another language as well.
Yes.
Very good. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up question? Or?
Yes, we have several followers, and there were some questions I think that you already answered now with what you just said, Annick. I would like to share this question from Heather. How do we encourage children to use the minority language without putting pressure on them?
Yes. I very much know that there are parents who think that trying to socialize their children into using a particular language doesn't leave the child with enough freedom. Well, we all teach our children things, yes, and it depends. Is it really, you have to really worry. Like if a child says, cookie, 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 a 2-year-old wants a cookie. Are you going to give it to them? I think that very many parents would say, cookie, please. And they would only give the cookie once the child has said, please. Is that pressure? Sure it is. Is it bad? No. So, yeah, maybe there's a little pressure there. But I wouldn't call it pressure. I think it's just teaching children, just raising children. We also, it's not a fair comparison, but with other things like things that are dangerous for them, we put pressure on them. This is not dangerous for them. It's not dangerous for them, but it's teaching them. So I don't call teaching pressure, really. So I don't think you have to worry too much. It becomes more difficult when children get older because they are developing much more of their own personality. Children already have personality when they are younger, absolutely. But they become much more able to negotiate which language is going to be used in situations later on. And that sometimes it can become tricky. But if you haven't laid the foundation from when they were young, then later on it becomes, I would think, fairly impossible, as far as I've learned through my research and through my many, many, many contacts with parents over the 40 years or so that I've been dealing with this issue. It becomes very difficult to change that. But if you,
can I just bump in to say that much? It may be difficult, but it's not impossible, because
True.
I have seen things turned around. It's just a question of a parent putting themselves in the child's shoes and making sure that it makes sense for the child, listens to the child, because when they're older, you can't just say that this is how we're going to go, but then you have to work with the child and find what kind of motivates them. And when it comes to pressure, I think parents need to look at their children, because every parent knows their child best. If they see that the pressure is too much, then you may have to rethink what you're doing and find a different way of doing it.
True. Now, in terms of, one major click point that happens with children who are speaking your language to you, but then they start going to preschool. And so this is a very, very important key moment. And they come back from preschool and they're so filled in their minds with the other language, and they want to tell you, and it's such an incredible experience for them, good or not so good. But anyway, they're just going to tell you about it probably in the language of or very often in the language of the preschool, which is perhaps not the language you want them to speak to you, or that they were speaking to you before. And this is the time also I would really advise parents to kind of take off from work for a couple of days when their children start to go to preschool, because they, at least to be off of work when kids come back home and be able to spend a lot of time with children then, because you've got to catch that moment. You've got to kind of obviously be very interested in what they have to say. Let them maybe say everything in the language of the school, and then start and say, well, in the language that you want them to speak, maybe you can repeat that conversation a little bit and say, oh, and how was this? And did I understand you correctly that this is how it went? Oh, and what's that thing called? And so on, to really spend time with the child to try and move that back, and do this a few days in a row, and also give children the vocabulary they need, because some of the vocabulary from school is not going to be what, they haven't heard it at home. So you've got to try and pay real attention there, because that's like a key moment. And as somebody here, I think, Ute, you mentioned motivation, and motivation is indeed very important. Yes. So at that time, the motivation of such a young child, well, they want to please their parents also, but this, as we know, becomes a little less.
Yes, I really much appreciate what you're saying about taking off some time and really know when these crucial moments are. What you said, when they start going to a daycare in another language, or when any kind of bigger change happens, I think. Also when they start maybe school, or there is anything else going on in the family and is maybe perceived as disruptive or challenging for the child for whatever reason. It can be a moment that has an effect on the use of the language, whether because one of the parents is away more often than before. And this is exactly the moment where parents should, in effect, like you said, insist a little bit more and be more aware of the importance of maintaining the language somehow, also as something, I said, like a safety blanket in the middle of the storm, that you can say this is the way to go back to our language, which makes you feel comfortable and confident and lays the groundwork for the following years.
And I can't emphasize enough the importance of the vocabulary that you mentioned. You need to speak about assemblies, about lockers, about things, because those, you don't have those at home. So you need to speak about them and maybe read a book or something where all those words and phrases are included. So the child has got the words to tell you, because otherwise there's no way they can even do it because they don't have the words. So.
That's right. Yes. Now, of course, one problem with most preschools is that they use only one language and basically ignore whatever other languages children bring to the classroom, even though we know now that probably about 25% of all children in Western societies have another language at home than just the school language. And what is really important is that staff in preschools and in daycare centers earlier pays more attention to all these different languages, because for children, they soon realize that the other language that they also hear at home, or the only language that they hear at home, is really not valued. So their motivation goes down in the basement. And this is something that parents can do also actively, is working with schools and just asking about it. And of course, this is a totally different talk or interview because then, there's a lot to say about that. But I just want to mention it, that it's really important to realize that also as a parent. And I think many parents do realize it, but also seem somehow, they feel they cannot do much about it. Well, if you don't try to even discuss it, then nothing's going to change, of course.
And parents need to have the confidence to bring it up with the teachers as well, and perhaps suggest, well, I can come and talk about this country, or I can come and do some kind of films or anything. Yeah.
Sing a song in the other language, or I can teach the children how to say hello in my language, how to count to 5 in my language, stuff like that. And if then all the parents who know another language, of the children in the classroom do that, well, that is fantastic. And this gives all the children this sense that they are not ignored, their language is not ignored, and that contributes to their well-being. And that's something that in my most recent work, I really am dealing with and trying to explore children's well-being and families' well-being, because we know that parents feel horrible if their child, their 4-year-old, doesn't speak their language. I remember when I was a PhD student, I was doing recordings of a child in Bruges with an American father and a Belgian Dutch-speaking mother. And the father was very busy. He wasn't home very often, but I saw him on the weekends. And his daughter only said yes and no in English. And he could not speak Dutch, or hardly. And he spoke only English with his child. And he complained to me and he said his child, his 3-year-old, is rejecting him. So he felt terrible But he also was angry at the child, basically. And, you know, since then, at that time, I was only a PhD student. So I said something like, oh, well, maybe you should speak more to the child. You know, at that time, I wasn't, Liz Lanza hadn't done her work then yet. So I wasn't aware of the importance of conversational strategies, but I'm sure in that particular case, there wasn't enough talking in English with the child either. But then this parent, father told me, oh no, speaking a lot to your child doesn't matter. Noam Chomsky said so. So Noam Chomsky, for those people who don't know him as a linguist, Noam Chomsky is a very famous intellectual, including a very famous linguist, who indeed said that talking to a child isn't really very important, that input doesn't really matter, that language just basically comes. Well, it does not. There's so much empirical work with children has shown, and I will repeat this, that what really helps children is speaking with them, and speaking with them in a way that is supportive. So may I take a moment to speak a little bit about, you know, ways of speaking to children that are not necessarily to do with bilingualism. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, so what really is important is to speak a lot with your children from the very beginning. It's not because they're not speaking that they're not taking in language, and they need to be able to take in language first to be able to learn to understand, and then later they will start to speak. And you need to speak with them because they need practice in speaking. Now, how do you start speaking to a baby? You should really use this very special kind of talking to a baby like this. It's called infant-directed speech. Oh, how are you? Oh, good. Oh, is that a nice sucker? Oh, aren't you a pretty baby? Pretty baby. You see, I'm exaggerating the mouth movements. I'm exaggerating my eyes, and babies love it, and they need it. It's not that if you don't use that kind of talk to children, they will eventually learn language, but it'll take a lot longer. Okay, so you have to do that, and everybody has to do that in all the languages. And this is super important that you start by doing that, and your baby will pay attention to you. And attention is the first thing they need. Otherwise, they cannot process what comes out of your mouth, whether it's in one language or in both languages or in two languages. So you need to do that a lot and continue speaking a lot to your child. And when your child starts speaking, pay attention to what they're saying. Respond to what they're saying, even if it's just one word. Say, oh, yeah, that's really nice. And there are some beautiful examples on YouTube about that. You may not really understand what this little baby is trying to tell you, but if you don't show interest, that's not good. You need to show interest in what they're saying. And yes, when then they're a little older and they really will start to talk a lot, you will perhaps say, oh, stop talking, because it's very tiring. But no, this is showing that you've done a great job, because your child cannot learn to really speak a lot unless you have spoken a lot and unless you have responded to the questions. So, you know, if you go to the supermarket with your child and they're asking questions again, don't just ignore them. Pay attention. Answer them. Seriously. They have something to say. This is the greatest gift you can give to your children in the first years of life. It's hard work, whether in one language or in three. It's hard work, but it's all worth it. You're giving a treasure to your children, the treasure of being able to fluently speak. which is in our societies, especially in Western societies, is very valued and very important. You know what happens with people who do not have that ability, not in one language, let alone in two, is really bad. Well, I don't want to go into details, but it's not a good thing. So this is the gift you can give your children. And of course, reading books is one way of really supporting this from the very beginning. From when a baby is 2 months old, you can read a little book, which consists only of beautiful pictures, even if it's just 20 seconds, that you can say something about a picture and make a little rhyme. It's good for you too. It kind of boosts your creativity, challenges your creativity. So you can do that, and then gradually, you teach your child that it's fun. It's fun to talk about things. And when your child is maybe 7 months old or so, your child will come. Even if they're crawling, they know where the books are. They're going to crawl and get you a book, and they want you to read it. So it's also part of creating this very strong bond, which is obviously a great source of, it's very important for parents and children to have this bond.
Yeah, fantastic. Yes, I would just briefly come back to the ignoring a child's language at school, because languages are an important part of our identities. Bilinguals, multilinguals, every single language is a big part of your identity. And if that part of a child's identity, let's say a bilingual child, you are ignoring a lot of that child's person if it's not even acknowledged or appreciated at school. So I think maybe teachers don't always think, especially if you have monolingual teachers, they don't kind of think about it. So I think this is some awareness that needs to be raised, how important it is. Fantastic. I have so many other questions, but there's one thing I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that it's exposure is important, but it's not only not only about the quantity. It's about the effectiveness as well. So I now think of certain parents don't have that much time with their children. Maybe they do shift work or whatever. So is there a way to compensate for the little time in doing things to make it more effective when you do have the time to speak to your child?
Okay, it is true that obviously we all have our restrictions because of work and so forth. If you don't have a lot of time to spend with your child, then the little time that you do have with your child, I would like you to focus on your child. So yes, you could say, yes, but I have to cook. Well, your child can cook with you, and you talk about what you're doing. Discuss what you're doing. Ask the child, please go and fetch the milk. Do you know where it is? And the child says yes. And then you ask, where is it? Not just yes and no questions, right? So you try to also have the child practice the language, because without practicing the language, the child's not going to be able to speak the language, and language needs a lot of practice. Yeah. It's that's also why it takes so long for children to learn to speak. Really, it does take long. Some people say it doesn't take long, it's only 2 years. Well, 2 years is a long time. Yeah. So you have to make the most of the short time that you are with your child, and reading books is really important within that time. So even if you are a parent who's away most of the day, but you can be at home for about an hour before the child goes to sleep, make sure you can have a little normal conversation or an activity like cooking or something else that the child also likes. It doesn't, in cooking, they could learn to like it. And then book reading, and also talking about the book. So not just reading the book and the child has to listen. No, but engaging the child. Oh, look. Oh, what's that? What's happening on that page? And do you remember from yesterday what's going on the next page? Do you remember? Ooh, let me take a little peek. So engage with the child and draw the child out as much as possible. It's work. Parenting is work. Absolutely. Is it going to be enough? Well, it depends. You know, nobody knows how many hours are enough. What we do know is that the number of words per hour that you say to a child, that a child hears from you, has a direct effect on how many words that child is going to know. So you should try to cram in a lot of words in 1 hour. Of course, not just, you know, reading off a dictionary, but using words in a way that it makes sense, but speak a lot. And this is difficult for many people, not only because they're tired, but also because a lot of people are not that talkative. Mm-hmm. They have to force themselves. Yes, you have to force yourself. Maybe you become a slightly different person when you are with your child. Your child is going to have an effect on you anyway. But when you become a parent, you will become a little different. But try to speak a lot to your child. And there are lots and lots of differences amongst parents. So we have recordings of mothers interacting with their 5-month-old babies. We have recordings of like 60 or 62 mothers like that. It's just amazing how different mothers are already at that age. I mean, at that child age. So you have mothers who hardly, we record for an hour, mothers who hardly say anything in that 1 hour. And then we have mothers who are basically continuously talking to their baby, or with their baby, or when they're getting up, they're saying, "Oh, now I'm gonna get your what's it called, your diaper. I'm gonna go and get your diaper." You know, so they're describing what they're doing. And what we saw also is that the mothers who at 5 months, then the baby's not talking yet, of course, but we also have recordings of these same mothers when the children are 20 months of age. That means they're already walking, and a lot of them are already talking. That change pretty much stays the same. What I haven't done yet is really assessed. Does this relate to how many words the kids have? Well, this is one of my, my many projects that's still waiting. But there are huge differences. And so it's very difficult for a person who then doesn't talk a lot out of their own, personality, whatever, to talk a lot. But this is really something so important, and especially in a bilingual setting, because very often you may be the only person carrying or modeling this other language. And maybe occasionally some Skype, or, occasionally somebody else, or when you go on vacation in the country where you're from, maybe then child will hear the other language. But so especially in those cases, it is of so much importance to really grab those opportunities when you are with your child.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like books are that's a fantastic media. I know you haven't researched this, but what do you think about videos and films as language exposure? What's your take on that?
Well, it all depends a little bit on the age of children. Yes. I am not a great fan of putting 1-year-olds in front of a tablet, which I know is happening all the time. I know it's not something we can say, it's good for a little moment and that's it. What it does take away from interaction with a child. At the same time, it also gives parents much needed space and time. How much is the child at age 1 going to learn language-wise from a tablet, let's say pretty much nothing. As they grow a little older, preschool, yes, most certainly, they will learn a lot through watching videos. An example is my eldest granddaughter, who, even though she heard English from her parents, but nobody spoke English to her, but when she was 4 years of age, she spoke really good American English. And why? Because she really spent, I think, too many hours, but she spent many, many, many hours watching her favorite shows in American English online, including at that age about Dora the Explorer. And basically she learned child English, or, you know, these particular American ways of talking, girl talk. She learned it online. There was no other source. Yes, she did. So yes, they can learn a language or more about a language through exposure to videos and films. Absolutely. Yes.
And there are ways of making them more interactive as well. If you, unless you're using the TV as a babysitter, but if you do have time and maybe a child wants to watch some certain characters or programs, then sit with your child and maybe sometimes stop it and ask, what do you think they're going to do next?
Absolutely.
Or speak about the thing afterwards. So you make it more interactive.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. And they'll want to speak about it too. I mean, I remember also my 4-year-old talking to me a mile a minute about, what was it? Oh, she had, you know, I don't even remember. It's a long time ago. She's now 10 years old. Sorcely or something, Sorcely, and was doing this. And then they were flying to the rainbow, and it didn't make any sense to me. But she was trying to build a story. And this is so important because also at that age, that's when you really start to be able to tell something like a story. And you need also to give kids that time to kind of process the contents of what they saw. And she, in this case, she was trying to tell it to me in Dutch, but that became really difficult because her Dutch was very weak at that time. And anyway, so she told me in English, which is fine. And yeah, it's an important point, Rita. Yes, we should also engage children about what they were seeing and how do they think that it's going to proceed, you know, next week when they can watch again. Maybe next week. How is it going to be, you know, and what's going to happen to that particular character and so on and so forth. And in that sense, it can be really important.
Yeah. I would like to share a comment of Nordrock. I cannot share it because it's quite long on the screen, but I'm going to read it out. We run bilingual support sessions for children at our language center, as we believe it is important to ideally create peer experiences, so to get children out of the usual family bubble and engage in vocabulary which is not always part of our family language, and meet others you are not emotionally connected to. So this goes beyond the family, right? Where then the home language or the family language is fostered outside of the home in another setting with peers, so to say, with children of the same age group. To continue, it supports children in not feeling detached from their other language. It helps with cultural input and increases their self-confidence. It can help in overcoming the existing hierarchies. And I think this goes all hand in hand with what you said before of this harmonious bilingualism or healthy bilingualism, how we want to call it. Annick?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. About healthy bilingualism, I'll say a little bit about that later. Yeah, exactly. Of course, the more different settings in which children can use their home language or one of their home languages, the better, of course. Now, the one thing that is a bit of a problem in many of such initiatives, I mean, they're great, it's a great initiative, is that the children often do not wish to speak like the non-school language with each other, and that they're only speaking the school language with each other. So if you've managed to get children to actually then speak the non-school language with each other, well, kudos to you. That's really great. But obviously that is important. And in the more, maybe, I'm not saying that this is an unnatural situation, but the more natural situation is, of course, when you go to the country where your family used to live, or the rest of your family still lives, and there are cousins there that your child can play with in the other language. That's going to give a huge boost to the learning, and it's going to show children also, well, this language isn't just something between my mom and myself. No, it actually exists. There are actually other people who speak it. And that often is, for very young children, also a very important thing to recognize. That is just not just that secret language, in isolated bilingual families who don't have a lot of community support for the home language. This is truly of great importance. I just want to finish then with this thing about healthy bilingualism. Well, I much prefer the term harmonious bilingualism. I first used in 2004, I gave a talk in which my title was Healthy Bilingualism. Then I was invited by a French journal to write an article about that, which I did. And then it was being translated into French. Now, I do know French, but my French is not that great that not at that time. My French is now better than then. But at that time, I would have found it very difficult to write in French from the very beginning. So I worked together with a translator. And she said, healthy bilingualism, how do I say that in French? And I said, yeah, I know, it's not too great, it's not too good. And she said, le bilinguisme harmonieux, harmonious bilingualism. That's it. Because also, what is unhealthy bilingualism? I don't go there. So that's why I don't really like the term healthy bilingualism.
Okay.
And also this term harmonious bilingualism has really resonated with a lot of people, actually. So I'm very grateful still to that anonymous translator. I don't know her name or...
Yeah.
So.
No. Talking about the harmonious bilingualism and that you focused before, there is Malvina also with a long comment that I'm just going to read out. We often hear we need to focus on children's well-being, but as you briefly touched on, the family well-being is also very important when raising multilinguals. Do you have any thoughts or comments on how parents can balance expectations versus reality and their own emotions when raising multilinguals?
Yeah, this is why it's so important that there are events like this going on, and of the work that you're doing in your networks. And maybe I should also mention here the Harmonious Bilingualism Network at HaBilNet.org, where we talk about these issues. Because when people, many people who are raising bilingual children or find themselves raising bilingual children have no personal experience with bilingualism. So they don't know what to expect, and they just expect, in many cases, that obviously, because they speak Russian, well, their child's going to speak Russian, obviously. I mean, they don't even think about it. And this is the thing. You do need to think about it. You need to be aware of all these issues that we've been discussing and of the possibility that your child will not grow up speaking Russian. And that there are ways, and then, of course, if this happens, I've had people call me, parents, mothers, or speak to me throughout the years, nearly in tears. Once also at a reception, with a woman who found out that I work on child bilingualism. Well, she was German, and she said, and she started to talk to me about it, and with tears in her eyes, when she mentioned that her children, who she tried to raise with German and English, and she said, but I didn't succeed. And they don't speak German to me. I speak German to them, and they haven't, and she's talking about something that happened 15 years ago. When the child didn't, when her children didn't speak back German to her. And she's telling me, a perfect stranger, with tears in her eyes, when her children are already adults, young adults. So it's very deep-seated. We don't realize it in a monolingual situation, just how important and deep-seated language is. And it's not the same for everybody. Not everybody has these feelings, but most people, and also what I've read in the literature, the many studies, it all goes into that direction. I would say that 95% of parents really find their own language important, and that very few find it of no importance. Now, and there's some who have gone through a period of mourning when their child did not speak their language, started not speaking their language when they were in preschool, and now the child is in primary school, and the parent has sort of given up, might still be speaking their own language to the child, and the child answering back in the school language, because it never goes the other way around, never. And the parent may have just, said, okay, there's nothing I can do. And, after all, it's not important, And many parents, of course, switch completely to the school language and stop speaking their language to children. Well, then all is lost, of course, for at least through the home. That doesn't mean that the child cannot learn the language later on, but not in that home situation. So, I think parents have a lot of opportunities to educate themselves, but of course, not everybody knows about these events. I mean, all we can do is try and make people aware. But yes, it really is like a roller coaster of feelings often that parents have. And yes, when I talk about harmonious bilingualism, I'm really addressing that on the family level, because it does function on the family level.
Yes, and there is another comment from Nodrok about most parents find their language important, but hardly any of them have ever thought about their relationship with their own language. And I think this is what you now explained very, very clearly. And I would like to add another aspect, that even if you give up, or you seem to give up because the child is not responding in the right language at some point, it doesn't mean that a few years later the child might not come back and say, please, just can we catch up and talk that language again, like it happened with me and my son, who when he was 11, he wanted me to speak Italian with him again, and since then we speak regularly, and he really is almost very fluent, I might say. But so it can come back. And I just think also Rita is nodding and Tetsu is nodding. We always say it's never too late to restart with a language that maybe got somehow in the background. I don't want to say that it got forgotten or lost. I think language loss is another topic, but it's never too late to reintroduce it and to revalue it, especially when it is so important for a parent. Like you said, grieving a language that you haven't spoken with your child. Once they are out of the house and they are adults, it might be too late, but as long as they are with you, you can.
When they're adults, it's not too late either. But of course, it becomes a little more difficult. The situation is different. And so on. Yes, absolutely. Or as happened with actually the child I studied for this book, who was a fluent bilingual in Dutch and English. In the first 4 years of life, but she then lost the ability to understand and speak Dutch very soon because she moved to the United States, and her father, I think, who then became all of a sudden her sole input source in Dutch. I think he stopped speaking Dutch to her. So when she came back to Belgium to visit the grandparents, there was no communication going on. I have it on record. Her grandfather made some recording for me where this child is so angry at the grandfather, like, talk to me in a language I understand. Oh, so this is very hurtful. But 10 years later, the child came back again to Belgium and discovered one of her very good-looking cousins. Well,
there was the motivation.
Her daughter very soon. Yes.
There's motivation.
So if we want to go back to Malvina's question a little bit, the second part of it, when she says, do you have any thoughts, comments on how parents can balance expectations versus reality and their own emotions when raising bilingual? So what should parents take into consideration when they're setting the language goals for themselves and their children?
Well, I think one major expectation that parents should not have is that children can learn several languages in no time without any effort on the part of the parents or on the part of the children. So in my experience, a lot of parents have incredibly positive attitudes towards bilingualism and multilingualism and all the languages involved, but they have no idea about how small children actually learn language. They have no idea about the importance of speaking a lot to children, giving them support in learning a language. So I think that kind of expectation should be more realistic, basically. Another thing is that, on the other hand, there are expectations that children will be confused with many languages, and that's why you don't speak your language, a particular language, to your child, and you decide to speak just one language from the very beginning, with the idea that once the child is a little older, 4 or 5, you will easily switch to your language. Sorry, no, doesn't work. Your child will, maybe there are a couple of exceptions, but language is emotion. And if you have that idea, namely that you do want your child to become bilingual, but you're concerned about it being too difficult for a child to learn 2 languages, so that's basically the opposite expectation of other parents. Yes. Well, fortunately, you don't have to worry about children learning more than one language from a young age. It does not confuse them. It does not slow down development, as you can hear a podcast about that through the HaBilNet.org website in 4 languages. So don't be concerned about that. If transmitting a language is important to you, start doing it from when your child is born. Don't wait.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
Amen to that.
Absolutely. I've just realized that an hour has whizzed by.
Oh my goodness me.
Absolutely. We could go on for hours and hours. Do we have any more questions from the audience that we needed? If there are, we will come back to them and answer them in the comments. So don't worry if you've asked a question and we haven't answered it. We will pick it up in the comments. So thank you so much for all this, Annick. It was fantastic. We have learned. It's been so much important information, and we will make sure to spread this message so people watch it. And to end it, I would like you to share some words of wisdom and encouragement to parents. And also, please do tell us a little bit about your Harmonious Bilingualism Network, because that sounds very intriguing to me.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, encouragement to parents is that there are millions, there have been billions of children who have managed to learn 2 or 3 languages at an early age. So that should be encouragement enough. Yes, absolutely, it's possible. And if anybody comes along to tell you that it isn't, well, just give them my email address, okay? I'll put them straight. And just come to our website, the Harmonious Bilingualism Network website, HaBilNet.org, where you'll find all kinds of resources. We also offer consultation services. We're a team of international consultants who are really specialists in the field, and we're happy to help parents such as yourselves. And we also have articles there, but it is research-based, absolutely. We're not going to tell you things that we really don't know about, or we're not going to give you any fake news either. So, but yes, be encouraged. Yes, it is absolutely possible for children to become bilingual and to be, have it as a matter of course. But sometimes you have to battle forces that come from outside. And of course, maybe also inside the family, your partner needs to, both parents need to support the bilingual. If that's not the case, it's going to be very difficult. Yeah, and it's going to, language should never become a battleground. Yeah. So your relationship is much more important than which languages you're going to speak, right? So I think there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of opportunities for all our.
Thank you so much, Annick, and all the links and everything that you mentioned there, they will go into the show notes. So anyone watching this and want to get the links, and just check our show notes. We always update those, so you can find all the information
in the description.
there.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Annick.
Thank you
All
for
right. Well, thank you very much. I would also like to thank everybody who has been watching. We've got a lot of audience and lots of questions, so thank you so much for this interactive session. So looking forward to the next session. Here we go. In 2 weeks.
Great.
Yes, exactly. In 2 weeks. Yeah, we were talking about Harmonious Bilingualism Net. And this leads us to our next guest at Raising Multilingual Live, where we will have Professor Janice Nakamura. She's Associate Professor at Kanagawa University in Japan. And she's also a supportive member of HaBilNet. So she will be our guest on Tuesday, 16th February. And she will talk about bilingual children who only speak one of the languages, who understand the other language as well, but don't speak it for several reasons. So we will discuss about what parents can do. Please save the date, Tuesday, 16th of February at 8 a.m. New York, 1 p.m. London, 2 p.m. Paris, and 10 p.m. Tokyo. So the time will be slightly different from today. We are looking forward to having you online with us and participating in the next Raising Multilinguals Live.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Professor De Houwer. This has been a fantastic session. And we definitely look forward to the next session. I guess it's around passive speakers, a very, very big topic.
Receptive bilingualism. You use that word.
Yes. Fantastic. Okay, so beware, the timing is a little different. So once again, 8 a.m. New York, 1 p.m. London, and 10 p.m. Tokyo. I mean, it's pretty relevant to folks from Tokyo also. So definitely be careful for the next session. It's going to be on the 16th of February. All right. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.